Yo, what's going on, Tank Clan? It is your boy King Next here, back with another video, and you guys already know the details. Like when it comes down to Neptune, and like they already had like their part to play in helping me with this script. And yeah, let's just get on with the video. They have their own thing that they're working on called Data Life X DXD, because of the fact that they're basically combining universes, and they're also looking for a co-writer and an editor. So if you're interested, hit them up on Discord. They're like one of the admins in my server, so you can just DM them there from there. Oh yeah, and I have a Discord. You guys should probably join my Discord because there's like a bunch of new ideas there every day. You guys can also get to see my thumbnails early in case I would do plan on making that series. And yeah, let's just get on with the video. Roll that intro first though.
何としてでも勝つ何としてでも生きる
Sona was just given a cup of tea to sip. It was a bit hot still, so she simply stirred it a little bit, hopefully helping to cool it down. She looked up from her cup of tea and requested for the reborn Milim to speak about what happened at the park that night. After all, it had them littered all over. Issei sweat jumped before explaining that they tried to hold back as much as possible. It wasn't their fault that the fallen angel tried to kill them, only to find that they were way too out of their league to even be considering trying to challenge the destroyer in any sort of way. Sona simply had an annoyed look on her face. She wasn't surprised in the slightest. This was how Milim always was in her old life, and it had passed on to their reincarnation too. It would take a little bit more effort to cover this sort of action up. Having everyone forget about Ragnar's existence was a rather simple technique almost all devils knew though, so she was hardly annoyed at that. She was just glad she could nip this issue in the bud only a day after, while everyone was still confused, instead of a week or month in which people were heavy into their speculations. Things would have become more complicated if that were the case. Alright then, just be sure to report these sort of things as soon as you can to me. I know you're well capable of handling yourself, but this means more than you might think. There's a possibility more fallen angels are out there wanting to kill you. I'm unsure if it's because they fear your sacred gear, or if they know about what you originally were, but we need to resolve it as soon as possible. Issei didn't really care all that much, but Sona was still relatively concerned, not for just Issei but the peerage as a whole. Just what did this mean? While Sona was left in paranoia though, Issei decided to go for a bit of fresh air. He grabbed his jacket and walked out to the school building. After all, the teachers feared him, and the students were basically his lackeys at this point. No authority would stop him if he wanted to leave school early, since the other park was decimated from last night's actions. Issei figured it'd be a better choice to go to the second closest park. Maybe grab a bite to eat while there? Who knows? While at the park, he simply was enjoying Mother Nature. It was so peaceful and the sun was shining bright. So brightly actually that it was a bit hard to see. He ended up bumping into what looked like a nun or a priestess. He apologized, but she waved it off, saying that it was okay. She seemed nice. You see, Issei already liked this girl. She asked an interesting question though. She was looking for a specific church building, but the only issue was with the fact she didn't know where it was. She had gotten lost on the way, but was hoping that Issei knew the way. Although he wasn't all that big on something like church buildings or geography in general, he still knew his way around. Considering what Issei was, it seemed like a bad idea in hindsight to be taking this girl to what was basically a devil's nightmare place. But that stuff really only worked on weaker devils. The girl was also rather polite, and he did bump into her earlier, so this was essentially him making up for his earlier blunder. Once they made their way to the church, Asuya seemed to have a massive smile on her face. She seemed so happy, it seemed so innocent, and she had an almost repulsing pure glow to her. Issei felt two arms wrap around his waist, and he was a bit surprised at that moment. He looked down to see that it was Asuya hugging him. He wasn't all that familiar with these sort of things, but figuring that it only made sense to mirror her actions in that moment the best he could. Once Asuya released the hug, she thanked Issei for his help before waving goodbye. Entering the church, Issei felt a new warmness in his heart after that moment. It was a precious feeling. He smiled as he stuffed his hands in his pockets, leaving the area. They would meet again, hopefully, but for now Issei wanted to continue enjoying Mother Nature until it started to rain. It was just a pain afterwards since he forgot to bring an umbrella. He used a magical circle to teleport back to school before he got soaking wet. The next time he ended up meeting Asuya, it didn't take more than a couple of days at best though. He wanted to see her again one day, sure, but he would have never expected to meet her in such a situation like this. He was fighting off a crazy dude in a game of swordplay who was professing how all devils should die and all who were connected could only be purified through death as well. He was overall just a rather irritating opponent. Hardly much of an opponent, to be honest, considering the major strength gap between the two of them. Issei kicked Reed in the gut at one point, causing the older male to stumble. Issei didn't let this opportunity pass him though, considering how open he was. Reed had fallen over, and in that moment Issei made sure to chop off the man's arm. The one that he used to wield a sword, that was. The screams from Freed caused a commotion though, and the blonde-haired girl ran over to see what was happening. What Asuya saw left her frozen in place. Fear. Fear was all she felt in that moment. Such a nice person. Such a nice person she had met just days before was standing before Freed, her senpai to an extent, with a sword dripping in blood. She looked down to see a fallen Freed, and he was bleeding profusely. It was all coming from his hand getting cut off. The man screamed bloody murder the whole time until Issei grew agitated himself. From all the screaming, he decided to end it at that exact moment by plunging his trusty sword through Freed's heart, effectively killing him. He looked up at Asuya and smiled creepily at her. He walked over to her. She slowly backed away, but Issei grabbed her by the shoulder. The girl didn't know what to do at this point. She was absolutely terrified. What was Issei going to do to her? Would he kill her just like Freed, or more painfully, would it have been better to act like she never heard anything and stay put? So many thoughts were running through Asia's head at that moment, but her mind completely went blank when she saw Issei open up a portal. He flung her through it while he simply stepped through it. Asia picked herself up and dusted off her uniform. She looked at where she was, and although it seemed rather ordinary, it was still terrifying to her. She was in an unknown place with unfamiliar people. Were these Issei's allies? More devils? She was scared and began to crawl up into a ball. Issei? Sona questioned. What? Sona looked down at Asia and then back up at Issei. She raised an eyebrow. So, I actually met her a couple of days ago and she seemed so nice. Even today, when the guy I killed talked about me being a filthy devil, Asia didn't even seem to be affected much about me being a devil, but what happened to... I'm not sure if that was her dad, brother, sensei? I don't really know. All I know is that I want to protect her with your guys' help. Along the okay. I'm going to stop you right there, mister. What do you mean by the guy I killed? Sona hollered. Issei shrugged before explaining what he did to Freed. Sona was speechless. It was almost as if this kid was trying to start another war. He was moving rather recklessly after all. She couldn't just let that slide. Maybe for Rainier, but this? No way. She demanded a further in-depth explanation. Issei signed before establishing how he was meant to fulfill a contract with someone, but found out about how it was meant to be a trap since his client was actually killed. Freed trying to kill him first, so technically this could have also been seen as an act of self-defense, right? Sona rubbed her forehead, hearing that. This situation was just getting more and more complicated for her, wasn't it? She supposed it was a small sacrifice in order to have such a strong individual like Issei as part of her peerage. Issei explained how he wanted to know if Asia could also be turned into a devil, but Sona denied that request almost immediately. She was willing to help keep Asia safe from whoever would be looking for her, sure, but to turn her into a peerage member seemed impractical considering Sona didn't even know what she could do or even gain her loyalty. It was just giving a random person more power than they already had in this case. Sona moved logically, but she wished she could say the same for Issei, although he had his moments of true and utter genius. Okay, so from here we're going to be changing things up a bit. Issei would decide to bring Asia home with him afterwards and also planned on giving her a tour of his school. Sona was still rather curious as to Asia's allegiance, but she decided to leave her with Issei for now because of the fact that she was taking into account just the insane amount of power he had. He was able to take down fallen angels like it was a piece of cake, and he was the reincarnation of Milim as well. A rather strong individual, even stronger than Sir Zex. When it came on to Asia, she would try to flee the scene, but Issei would simply speed past her and karate chomp her in the neck, which would effectively knock the girl out. Things would have turned completely dark for Asia. She would have fainted in Issei's arms, and he would have carried her back to his place. When she woke up though, she wouldn't be able to recognize where she was. And as far as she was concerned, she was in just another weird place, another completely foreign place to her. She would remember what ended up happening to her earlier, and she would begin to actually grow a bit fearful. She was scared now. Just what did Issei do to her? What was he going to do to her now? All of these things were running through her head. Was he going to eat her? Was he going to try and manipulate her? Or what else? After all, he was a devil, so there was no telling what he was capable of. But she would just start to look around. Her heart would be racing until she spotted Issei in the corner, and he was drinking strawberry milk? Huh? He would just raise his hand, greeting the girl. Asuya would be confused and ask where she was. Issei would state that, well, she was at his place and that he'd request she take a shower now since she was awake. He would also inform her of the fact that Sona ended up getting her enrolled into the school with minimal difficulty, so he would appreciate her taking a shower and dressing up in some school clothes that Sona had prepared for her. And after all, she was basically knocked out the whole time anyways. He had already taken a shower and he just needed to, well, change into his uniform. Issei would hand her the school clothes, and after she took the shower, she would change into them. Afterwards, they would just be on their way to Kuo Academy. Asuya would find that Issei was quite a bit of a talkative person. Not at all what she was expecting before. When it came on to Freed, it seemed like he was a cunning sort of person, a sort of a violent person as well. She was getting the wrong interpretation of Issei when she saw what ended up happening to Freed, but it seemed that Issei was a relatively nice guy, talkative sure, but still caring. She would begin to warm up to Issei during their walk to school, and by the time they reached the school building, she would find it to look like a pretty nice place. Until she went inside. As soon as she went inside, the very first thing she ended up seeing was several people fighting each other with no regard for the rules there. Everyone would freeze in place as soon as they saw Issei though. They would walk the halls together, and the other student populace would bow to Issei. Asuya would look at Issei strangely. She was curious now. What sort of rule did Issei have over this place? What sort of influence did he have? What exactly did Issei do to these kids to have them be so subservient to him? Issei would state that he was basically the head of this school. Sona was essentially his counterpart, since she focused more on the school's academic reputation. She wanted to make sure that that would still be kept intact, considering her role as the student body president. She was basically the president of the student council. Those whose grades fell below a certain level would be brought down in the ranks, losing any sort of privileges they could have had. Even if they were assigned a higher role by Issei, their grades still mattered to an extent according to Sona, considering everything that was previously established. She was the student body president, student council president. She was heavily focused on grades. She was more interested in intellect rather than pure raw strength, unlike Issei. When it came on to pure raw strength, that was basically Issei's territory. If you were not strong, then you better at least be academically strong. You had to be good in something. You could not be bad in both, or else you would probably end up being the weakest link essentially. It was survival of the fittest at this school, And Issei was going to make sure that when it came on to Asuya, she would be one of the fittest in the very end. Asuya, hearing all of this though, would wonder what sort of illegal business Issei was probably running at this point. In her mind, it sounded like he was running some sort of drug cartel. After all, like, what kind of school would have it to where like it's survival of the fittest at all times? Unless they were doing something illegal on the other side. Sona would walk up to Issei and Asuya. Asuya would be nervous in the taller girl's presence until Sona adjusted her glasses, gauging Asuya's strength. She would find that Asuya wasn't all that strong and she was hardly a threat, to be honest. She had done her research on Asuya just yesterday, and she was a bit hesitant still, but she still ended up giving a chess piece over to Issei, essentially giving him the green light to reincarnate Asuya now. She had looked into Asuya's history and found that she was actually excommunicated from the church for healing a devil. This made her far less of a possible threat, considering the fact that she had healed the devil, implying that she was probably more than willing to be able to help any sort of life regardless of their race. She could respect that. So that's why Sona was willing to be so gentle towards Asuya. She would have usually been more strict towards others, but then again, with one person, she was willing to turn them into a devil just because of the fact that they managed to walk in on her during one of her meetings as a devil, or basically one of her peerage meetings. They basically came in at the wrong time, but because of that, she figured why not turn them into a devil, even though they had no real special qualities. So it would be a bit unfair to just be judging Asuya so harshly in comparison. Asuya would be reincarnated later on in the day by Sona, and she would welcome her into the ranks of the Sona Citri peerage. Sona and Riasa's peerages would have a bit of conflict though, due to the fact they were planning on getting familiars on the same day, so they would hold a competition. It would be a dodgeball tournament. This tournament would basically be a blowout though, considering how Issei was on Sona's side. It was a relatively easy victory, and Asuya would end up getting a baby dragon as her familiar, while Issei would get a bird. It sounds a bit weird at first, but the bird familiar Issei picked out had two specific traits he would benefit the most from having, these being teleportation and astral projections of their owner. Issei's thought process would have been a bit immature though. Essentially, what was going through Issei's mind was the fact that he could probably make fun of people while not even having to be in the same room anymore. That meant he could technically be in two places at once and make fun of more than one person at once now. He liked that. So, in his opinion, this bird was a keeper. And it would also come in handy during a meeting with Rias in terms of the girl's marriage to Riser Phoenix. The bird would teleport to the occult research club, and the peerage members would question what the bird was here for. Graphia would soon arrive as well via her magical circle. The peerage members would question whose bird it was until a projection of Milim was formed by the bird. At first they were thinking it was probably Graphia's own, but once they saw a projection of Milim, Rias's face went pale and her jaw dropped. Everyone would be surprised to see what appeared to be a hologram of Milim form from the bird, and even more surprised when they began talking. Gravia didn't appear to be all that surprised though. Rias, of course, was the exact opposite, and the others, they were kind of confused. Some already knew of Milim's track record, and they were aware of the fact that the destroyer was dead. So how were they talking now, unless this was pre-recorded by this bird or something? Rias would even comment on the fact she thought Milim had committed seppuku. Gravia wouldn't admit to thinking that as well, but once they've lived for as long as she has, these sort of things you simply don't even bother questioning. After all, it was Milim they were talking about. So a lot of weird things would end up happening when it came on to this destroyer, this demon lord. Rias would question the purpose of why Milim was here before immediately beginning to think that they were probably here to inform her of the fact, well, she did not have to marry Ryza anymore. Ryza would make his presence known as well, only for his jaw to drop seeing Milim being projected by a bird. Ryza would quickly compose himself in the presence of Milim, and Rias would attempt to be a suck-up to the destroyer. Milim wouldn't be having any of it though, informing Rias of the fact that she would marry Ryza and breed with him to create even stronger devils in the future. Milim, for fun though, would inform Rias of the fact there was a chance for her to escape the marriage though. Rias would become a bit excited hearing this, until she heard the details. It would be Rias and their peerage fighting against Milim. If they could last 5 minutes against her reincarnation, then she would be free to do whatever she wanted. After all, there was no chance that Rias would actually be able to defeat Milim in battle, so this was basically the best that she was going to get now. If not, she would have to marry Ryza in the end. Ryza would be upset over the fact someone else was going to be fighting his battles, but since it was Milim speaking, he decided to hold his tongue. The reincarnation part interested him though. He wanted to know who was her reincarnation, and just how strong this reincarnation must be. Rias would have 1 month to train from there on. Knowing what she would be dealing with, Rias would bring out her bishop piece, Gasper. Rias would be a drill sergeant towards her peerage throughout that 1 month of training, barely giving them any breaks considering what they were dealing with. The peerage would deal with having to do weighted push-ups, squats, kilometer runs, and sparring 24/7. They'd wear weighted clothing all throughout that month, with the weight slowly becoming heavier every day. Gasper especially would be worked to the bone, due to just how strong his sacred Kia was. He would be crying in the corner, hoping that Rias wouldn't find him for a while every couple of days. Gasper's tears would leave him collapsing from dehydration. Rias would find Gasper on those days and slap him awake, pouring a jug of water down his mouth and forcing him to drink as much as he could within those 3 minutes, so that she would be able to work him again. He would have these 3 minutes to basically get his act together. That's pretty much all the amount of time she was willing to give him before training resumed. When it came to Issei though, he wouldn't have been going through such hardships. Issei was already strong. He had trained his whole life up until now, and he was going to train even more. Issei would look into Milim's memories and find that the best place to go for the month would be Rimmeru's capital. They would have the bird teleport him to the entrance of Rimuru village and introduce himself to Rimuru. Rimuru would have heard that he was Milim's reincarnation, but he would be skeptical. He would ask for proof. They would hear Milim's voice from Issei's sacred gear, and the mannerisms, they were exactly spot on. And Issei would even show Rimuru some of Milim's abilities, further validating his statement. Issei would state that he's here to train for an upcoming competition, and he would wish to go up against some of Rimuru's subordinates. Hearing that, Rimuru would send in some other weaker goblins to go up against Issei, only for him to quickly defeat them. Rimuru would continue to send in more goblins, only for them to continuously defeat them with minimal difficulty, surprising Rimuru. Rimuru thought that they were supposed to be Milim's reincarnation. Issei would admit to that being the truth, but the thing about him was he simply trained all his life in order to gain the strength and power of Milim. Not just that, but he was also the Red Dragon Emperor, which allowed for him to grow at an even more rapid pace. Issei, seeing that none of the other goblins would be a challenge for him though, would request to meet somebody, that person being Veldora. And that is where we end part 2, people. It is your boy King Tyrenex signing out. If you liked the video, you guys should probably like it. You guys should probably click that like button. Maybe leave a comment. If you like this video but still skeptical of subscribing to me, why not watch a couple more videos, and from there you guys make your decision. It is your boy King Tyrenex signing out. Peace.